Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal back in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and co workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he's interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He's currently a field investigator for the MUFON, MUFON UFO Network. He's also a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and one of the world's leading authors on the paranormal, UFOs, and aliens, having penned dozens and dozens of books. And he joins us now. Hi, Preston.
Hi, Dean. How you doing?
I'm pretty good. Actually, I kind of just took note of that first bit of the introduction where, you discovered that your family, friends, and co-workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Have you ever talked about that before?
Yeah, I sure have. That's what got me involved in this. It was a real shock. This was not a subject I was looking for. I was very skeptical of UFOs, anything paranormal. I did not believe it, but heard about a UFO sighting on the news. The whole family was watching it, actually.
Right.
A pilot over Alaska, November 17, 1986. And that's what kind of sparked my interest. I didn't really believe the pilot, but I was surprised to see him, basically, I thought, throwing his career away. Which turned out to be true.
Yeah.
to some extent. He was grounded.
Yep.
But found out, my brother had seen a UFO, my sister-in-law, several friends. One had missing time. Had a family member who saw gray aliens face to face.
Wow.
Brought it up at work. Same thing. People I'd worked with for years and years. People I loved and trusted had not told me that they had not only seen UFOs, but had very close encounters. I mean, 2 of them had missing time.
Yep.
So, this hit home for me.
Yeah.
Was not good news as far as I was concerned. I was pretty upset.
Yeah. So did they, have they continued to have experiences like that?
Yeah. As time went on, more family members and friends and even coworkers would come up to me like, this happened, that happened. Particularly people who are, I would say, experiencers, continue to have encounters.
That's classic. That's what we talk about a lot is, you go back to your past, you think even go back as far as your school days where people may be acting a little bit odd or offish and don't quite appear to fit in. And many of us just assumed it was problems at home, but who knows? They may have been having experiences and just were afraid to talk about them.
Yep. I think it's a lot more common than people realize.
Yeah.
I heard a quote from J. Allen Hynek. This was very early on in my research. He said 1 in 40 people have been taken on board.
Wow.
And I thought, no way. That's way too many. I know 40 people. And that's when I really started to ask everyone I knew. And I didn't have to ask 40. And, that quote may sound like a lot, but the Roper poll, the Roper organization, they do polling. In 1991, they tackled the UFO subject and found 1 in 50 people show the markers of being a UFO abductee.
Right.
So I think it's fairly common.
Wow. Kathy Martin floored me last year when she talked about abductees just in the United States alone totaling into the millions.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this slides under the radar because many people who have missing time perhaps don't quite realize it. Often people are very reluctant to go forward. It's not at all unusual when I interview someone who's had this kind of experience they'll say things like, I've not told anybody. I have not even told my spouse. I don't have a history of mental illness. I've got a good job. They've got all these sort of caveats. They're very nervous about talking.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the book, Wondrous. It's your latest offering, and I think it's fantastic. I think the public, the audience, love to read other people's experiences, and you've put them together in such a way where it's a very easy read, and it kind of leaves I guess it leaves a lot of question marks at the end of each story where people were trying to fill in the blanks. But what made you decide to put together a collection of stories like this?
Well, this is my favorite thing to read myself. I really love a UFO book that tells firsthand stories, particularly people who've had extensive encounters or unusual encounters. I mean, books about Roswell are all well and good. It's a great case, but it's a bit old.
Yeah.
A lot of the books published these days are sort of rehashes of old material. And I wanted to put a collection of new stuff, stuff that I think has something to contribute to our understanding of this phenomenon, and all my own cases. So, I also wanted to put a wide variety of cases into a book.
Yeah.
Some of these cases were ones I'd sat on for a while because I just couldn't find room for them.
Yeah.
Like some government whistleblower cases, a really interesting USO account, unidentified submersible object, some sightings that were a little bit more than just sightings because I had telepathic contact, this sort of thing.
Yep. Yep. So they're all news stories, and I mean, I get correspondence on a weekly basis from people, you know, not saying they want to talk about their story, but just to let me know about their experience, and then I'll hear from them a lot of the times, you know, even several months later. You know, they've decided, well, it's time to tell it, and they'll come on and tell it. So I don't think there's any shortage of stories out there, Preston.
Oh, no, there sure isn't. I have a steady stream of people contacting me. Many of the cases in this book are from friends of friends, perhaps, or people at work, someone who read one of my books, heard me on a show like yours, found my website. They're searching for help. A lot of people are having these experiences.
I mean, they are really amazing and they're fascinating. So, you know, you're right. I mean, we keep hearing about the same stories over and over, and you know, fantastic as they are, it starts to get a little bit boring. And why do you think when I say the mainstream UFO media tend to overlook a lot of these other events that happen, and in most cases, a lot of them are more spectacular than the ones they're actually reporting on all the time?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, there's probably multiple reasons for that. It's hard to say for sure. But the media, I think, likes to stick with, I don't know. I've wondered this because I've been called on to do TV shows and like, would you mind talking about Roswell? I'm like, really? Roswell? Okay. Sure. It's hard to say. I think one reason is they don't realize how much information is really out there. And they like a story that's already been vetted to some extent. But I don't know.
Maybe it's still, maybe, you know, there's still a little bit of skepticism on their part, because I noticed that a lot, you know, in UFO forums and groups where, you know, you can post a UFO sighting on those groups and everyone will be, wow, that was fantastic. Yeah, an experience will go on there and tell them about what happened to them, you know, in a close encounter, and they get torn to pieces.
Yep.
It's almost, I say laughable, but it's almost amusing that there's skepticism within a UFO community about about close contact stories.
Yeah, I wonder about some of them too, because this is a subject that's tightly controlled. There is a cover up, and some of these some of these people are not skeptics. I don't think. I think they probably know this is real. They're debunkers. They are purposefully throwing, sand into the gears, trolling.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to call them paid government disinformation agents, but we know those sort of things do exist. The cover-up is no joke. It's still in place despite the recent disclosures, which are a bit laughable when you think about it, because they're talking about 144 recent sightings. Like,
Right.
really, you're talking about sightings? We have landings.
Yeah.
People being taken on board. We have UFO crash retrieval incidents. There's reverse engineering. So I think it's important to note that, yeah, this subject is still tightly controlled, and there is disinformation and debunkers out there. It's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still a problem.
Yep. Well, the book Wondrous covers a full spectrum of UFO and alien encounters. You've done a great job in casting a wide net over them. How did you decide which stories would make the cut in the end?
It's always a difficult choice. Ones that I think are a bit unusual. I like to include those. Ones that I feel like have a higher level of credibility. Some sort of physical evidence always get high priority. But ultimately, I wanted to, like you say, include a wide spectrum to give people a good understanding of this phenomenon. And cases, like I said earlier, that have something to contribute to our understanding. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize that simple sighting can have telepathic contact.
Right.
And like there's a case involving very extensive communication with a gray alien, a long conversation this lady had, and got a lot of information. That was a case I really wanted to include.
Right.
So I kind of just go through it on a case by case basis, and if it resonates with me, and I find it very fascinating, I'm thinking, well, probably other people will too.
Yeah. The stories in the book seem to have well, trying to think of the right description, almost a South American feel to them, where they're strange and they're terrifying in a sense. There was always a shock factor to the South American sightings that we hear about, um, but the ones you've got basically happened over here in the States.
Yeah, I'm try very hard to be objective and to not sort of influence people's stories with my own beliefs or
Mm-hmm.
preconceptions about this phenomena. There's a lot of shoe fitting and cherry picking in this field. Researchers have a theory and they will march out cases to support it. And really, it should be the opposite. You
Yeah.
first march out the evidence and then form your theory. So I have cases which are alarming, and some which are very friendly, and the whole sort of spectrum in between, because
Yep.
this is what people are experiencing.
Is there a favorite among the 25 you've written about in the book?
That's a hard choice,
Yep.
but absolutely some I think are very interesting to me. There's one case involving a teacher, a daycare worker, who had a very unusual experience while out jogging early one morning outside her home in O'Fallon, Illinois, and encountered a very tall praying mantis being.
Wow.
That's one of my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Another involving a young lady and her teenage son from Indiana, who went to the dentist and discovered something very unusual in her son's mouth. Uh, yeah, all, I love all these cases, so it's a real hard choice for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's have a look at a few. You've mentioned a couple, but there's one, I've got a list of them, the ones that kind of caught my fancy that I love to read. There was one where there was a series of bizarre events culminating in an incredible healing encounter. Of course, we've done an interview in the past on alien healing. What happened there?
I think you're talking about the case of Dudley
Mm-hmm.
Delaney.
Yep.
Yeah, very interesting fella. Doctor, chiropractor, alternative healer. That immediately caught my attention because this is something I see quite a bit with people who are having contact. Lots of doctors, lots of social workers, lots of human rights activists, people who are
Mm-hmm.
doing good work for humanity. And so I sought him out because he had posted a little thing about how he had been healed. And I'm very interested in those types of cases. I wrote a book about it.
Mm-hmm.
And asked him if he would consent to an interview. He happily did. And he had really not had a lifetime of encounters like I normally hear from people. It turned out he did, but it sort of slid under his radar.
Right.
He did have some unusual childhood experiences. As an adult, once he did wake up and had a beam of light coming right through his ceiling into his bedroom. And even then, he didn't really connect it to UFOs. And his real major experience occurred actually when he was quite elderly, in his 70s, and was suffering from prostate problems. And woke up one evening and he was not in his bedroom. He
Wow.
was, yeah, in a small rounded room. And it was not very well lit, which is unusual. Normally people describe very much a bright room.
Mm-hmm.
But he looked to his side and saw a very unusual looking figure. It was not human, very short. He said its face looks sort of misshapen. And he was not scared. He felt very calm. He had an instant sort of feeling of goodwill from this being, and just had no fear for whatever reason. He was lying on his side, and this being began to probe him. And by that I mean the classic alien anal probe,
Mm-hmm.
which does happen. And he said it wasn't painful, it wasn't even unpleasant. And he got a message from this ET that he had a problem and that there was a tumor, which surprised him. And this ET, and I believe that's what we're dealing with here, extraterrestrials in the classic sense,
Yep.
told him that he would fix it and proceeded to do so. He felt energy, vibrations, and it was a pretty short experience, didn't last that long. And next thing he knows, he's waking up in the morning and feeling good, feeling very good about it, feeling healthy, feeling slightly altered, is how he put it.
Wow.
And his symptoms subsided. He was able to urinate freely and felt like he was healed. And I believe him because this is the details he was telling me match up very much with the cases I've heard of other people who describe healings.
Yeah, of course, you've investigated, I think, over 300 or 400 cases of healings around the world when we last spoke. So you'd certainly have an idea, but that's fascinating. There was another one involving a young artist who was visited by some short blue humanoids intent on recording all of her memories, which I found fascinating.
Yes, I love this case for a couple of reasons. One is this is actually a family member.
Mm-hmm.
My sister-in-law, who does a lot of the art for my books, did the cover for this one actually. And took her, some time for her to reveal this to me. I mean, we had known each other for years before she finally came forward and said, well, this happened to me when I was a little girl. This was in 1964. She was 9 years old and lived in Woodland Hills, California. This is a very densely populated suburb. And she shared a bedroom with her little sister. Woke up one evening in the middle of the night, like 3, 4 a.m., and there was someone standing at the foot of her bed. 3 someones.
Wow.
Short little figures. And these are not grays. These are not praying mantis. This is a very unusual type of ET, which I have heard before from a number of people, but I don't hear it a lot. She described them as short blue dwarfs. They had very thick skin with folded faces, kind of flat faces, wearing cloaks with hoods, short stubby fingers, small dark eyes, definitely unusual looking.
Mm-hmm.
She did an illustration showing what she saw, and I showed it to other contactees who described the blue beings. And boy, were they shocked. They were like, yes, this is exactly what they look like. And yeah, Christy is her name. She was not scared. And this being pulled her blanket off, exposed her bare feet. This is so unusual. And pulled out these little instruments like fiber optic cables, sort of, about as thick as a pencil, glowing, and started to press them up against the bottoms of her feet. And she asked them, what are you doing?
Right.
And they responded and said, oh, we are taking your memories. We are recording your memories. And she's like, oh, okay. Mind you, she's only 9 years old, so she doesn't have a whole lot of life experience. But this is what they said. And I have to tell you, I have heard of this in a number of other cases.
Was she able to move?
Yeah, to a certain extent. She would, but she didn't really feel any fear. She didn't even really recognize how unusual this was. She sort of just took it in stride. And what is unusual is she woke up, they were already there. She fell asleep while they were still there. And they came the next night and the next and the next and came for 2 weeks, every single night, uh, and doing the same thing. She told no one. She sort of felt like, well, it wasn't that unusual. These were her friends. She didn't feel the need to tell anyone. She didn't want to discuss it with her little sister, who was having some anxieties at this time about figures coming out of the closet.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing is after this ended, she felt a little bit emotionally bereft and
Right.
left alone. And both she and her little sister ended up going to the end of the driveway and staring up into the sky saying, "Don't leave us, take us back, come
Wow.
back, where did you go?" This sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing with kids, though. I mean, how many parents have heard from the kids about the figures that live in their closets or under the bed or visit them at night, and they just get dismissed? I mean, are
Yeah,
most of them actually telling the truth?
yeah, I always wonder about that because here we have little children who are dealing with something that, very early on in their lives. This is sort of the rule for people who are having contact. They will have early childhood experiences from around age 4 to 5,
Mhm.
6, 7, 8, 9, and it comes in waves, of course, and people can go years without any experiences. But
Yeah.
little children are dealing with this often alone without any help from their parents who, like you said, dismiss it and say, it's just a nightmare. I would caution parents to take a second look and at their child and see if they're being sincere,
Right. Right.
because this happens all the time. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who had this experience as children, and their parents don't believe them.
Yeah. Yeah. The the event with the young artist, was that a one-off? Was it 2 weeks and done? She never saw them again?
Correct. Yep. She never saw them again. But she does have a big UFO presence in her life. I mean, this turned out to be her life's work in terms
Hmm.
of an artist. We worked very closely from the beginning, her and I, and she works with a lot of experiencers, a lot of researchers,
Right.
does sort of connect to the energy, I guess you might call it, to draw people's ETs,
Yep.
and has had like telepathic contact, has had a number of very close up sightings, but as far as I know, isn't what I would call an abductee or an
Yeah.
experiencer.
Yeah. Yeah. This next story really is one that I hear a lot from people I interview that have had encounters. A woman having an encounter with a group of friendly greys, and then leads to a spiritual awakening, and she gets a whole heap of dire warnings for humankind, and that's one I've heard quite a bit.
Yes, yes, this is a very interesting uh, encounter, because she woke up one day or one evening and found these grays surrounding her bed, and doesn't really remember having any childhood encounters. I'm thinking probably there was something there that she's just not recalling, but hard to say. She says no, and I have to take her at her word. But she woke up and sees these grays and recognizes them as, grays, because they had been on the media at this point. This was 1998.
Hmm.
So grays had already become a part of our culture, I guess.
Yep.
But she felt no fear. She felt like a friendly presence from them. And she was initially paralyzed, couldn't move. And these guys were sort of going around her and had an instrument and were measuring something about her physical body. But at some point, the paralysis lifted and she sat up and she's like, wow. And it was had a fully conscious encounter. She doesn't remember the whole thing. At one point, she does lose consciousness. But overall, it was absolutely benevolent. She believes they healed her of a back problem. She told me that later.
Hmm.
She also says that she got the ability to do hands-on healing and has healed other people, became very psychic, started doing channeling, this sort of thing. And at some point she was taken again, and they gave her these warnings. And this is definitely, I would say, a regular feature of people who have extensive contact. They're given warnings.
Yeah.
And for her, it was quite horrific because they showed her our planet going through terrible catastrophes with great loss of life. And people often will get warnings, but they're not often shown the actual images of it. She was.
Right.
And so this was difficult for her, but it really drove the message home. She's a really wonderful lady. She's had other encounters since. She had an encounter where her pet was healed, actually. Her cat had gotten in a fight with raccoons, I think it was.
Wow.
And its eye was basically torn out of the socket. It was real bad. And then suddenly the cat is healed completely. And she can't think of any other explanation than something very unusual happening.
Yep.
But yeah, she was definitely given all kinds of very interesting messages in terms of our planet going through wars and people dying of starvation and us destroying this planet. That's the number one message from the ETs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that doesn't matter if it's grays or praying mantis or human looking or strange humanoids. They are, and it's been going on since the early 50s. Same message. So I hope we're listening.
Yeah, I get the ones that get relayed to me from contactees is basically the Earth burning, and I had one in particular was pretty scary. A contactee from Israel last year who was telling me his experience, and he was given warnings, and the Earth basically is just consumed in fire. And it was kind of similar to the scene on the movie Nicolas Cage was in, Knowing, which was made about 10 or 12 years ago. Great movie, you get a chance to watch it. Yeah, so on that occasion, it was sun flares, hitting the Earth and just burning it up. But who knows what lies ahead?
Yeah, I heard that same exact thing from another contactee I'm working with right now.
Yep.
He's absolutely concerned about sun flares and our planet being burned to a crisp.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's have a look at one more here. This involves a military officer who was invited into the inner sanctum of the government UFO cover-up, but once he gets in there, he learns some secrets that, as you put it, shake him to the core of his being.
Yes, a very interesting gentleman who I've actually been in contact with for quite some time. And finally, he revealed his whole story to me. And I was able to verify his employment. He was a Navy officer on the USS Kit, a Navy ship, and had top secret and clearance, and a really interesting gentleman who retired from the Navy and was actually on a scholarship and taking classes at a college when he was and he always had an interest in the paranormal and UFOs, sort of stayed connected to all of it. And when the internet started to become a thing, he would join online groups and discuss UFOs, and connected with some pretty high level Navy guys. And it turned out one of these guys was part of what we would think of as the secret government control group, who is, dealing with what crash retrievals and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he started to learn some interesting information about this, and developed a friendship with these guys, more than one. And one thing kind of led to another, and he was approached at this college by a gentleman and asked if he would like to join into this group. And the implication was clear that this was dealing with UFOs and in particular crash retrievals. He was told he would get a bump up in his security clearance, basically a promotion. and be a whole part of it. And he was very interested and continued to move forward with this until he found out that he would have to do this completely alone, meaning he couldn't have relationships, wouldn't be able to tell anybody anything. And that's when he kind of backed off a little bit because he had just developed a relationship with his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's like, no, I don't think I'm going to join, but still stayed connected and talked with some of these guys over and over again and learned all kinds of fascinating information, such as that there were at least two craft recovered during the Vietnam War. He was told that Agent Orange wasn't really to, roust out the enemy, but was in fact sprayed in areas where a craft had landed,
Right.
and was used to sort of secure the area so that they could get these craft and recover them. And he learned about Area 51. He talked to a gentleman who was part of the whole Area 51 complex and learned that it's actually a very large underground city with some 10,000 people in it.
Wow.
All kinds of studying going on, goes many, many levels down. And he was told, and this is actually, a number of people are learning this from other whistleblowers talking about Area 51, that it does go many stories down, and the lowest levels are devoted to extraterrestrial races and are pretty much occupied by the ETs.
Mm-hmm.
He had one face-to-face contact with one of these guys who looked human and thought he was human and a member of this control group. But right before his eyes, this guy was not human. He became a gray, transformed into a gray.
Wow.
So this apparently was he was walking around in disguise. I don't know, or if this was a screen memory or mind control stuff going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was an element to that with some of these members who tried to leave. They had their minds erased, and their memories came back later with what they had done in Area 51.
Yeah.
So it's a long, complex story, but definitely one I wanted to include because it's just fascinating information, and I think it corroborates what some other researchers are finding out.
Yeah. Does he feel, under any threat, even talking about it?
No, but he's been very careful. I think he does know stuff that he's not talking about. And he has, talked to these people who say to him, well, I can't tell you that, but if you ask me a question and sort of couch it in a way, I will be able to say yes or no. So they sort of feed him information in very circuitous ways.
Yeah.
Without actually saying it. They make him say it, and then they will just sort of nod, like, yep, that's right.
Right.
So they're not violating their security oath because they didn't actually say anything. It was him who said it.
Yeah. Some fascinating stories there, Preston. Ones that do kind of have a frightening element to them are the ones involving men in black. And there's one in there. You talk about two brothers who encounter a UFO in a public place. And then later on, one of the brothers is approached on the street by an entity clearly not human. And that's got to be a really frightening scenario for someone.
Yeah, it certainly threw him for a loop. These were very interesting fellas up in Northern California in the San Francisco area. They are street vendors. They make handmade jewelry and have a little booth where they sell their wares. And actually it was daytime, and I'm not sure if I have the date here, but at any rate, they saw a UFO. Oh yeah, April 1981. And just look up and there's this weird cloud and the cloud disintegrates, and it's actually a glowing football-shaped object that's descending lower and lower. And mind you, this is a crowded street. And so they're thinking everyone's got to be seeing this. That turned out not to be the case, strangely enough. But this thing came lower and lower till it was about 1,000 feet up. Then it divided into two objects and eventually moved off. And they were really impressed and, looked around and nobody else had seen this. This was bizarre, to say the least. But this is something I have heard before. Some people, there are incidents where everyone should be seeing it and they're not.
Yeah.
So I feel like this was a display sort of put for them personally. And there are some weird aspects to it because immediately prior to the sighting, both these gentlemen had weird telepathic messages. The one brother, they didn't want the real name used. He kept getting this message: "Don't look up, don't look up," and it was bizarre because he had no plan on looking up.
Right.
But finally looked up because this was becoming annoying and saw this UFO. And his other brother was like, "Well, that's weird because I kept getting this message: your shoe is untied. Check down to make sure your shoe is, still tied." And it was bizarre. But long story short, it was some years later, one of the brothers actually had a very unusual experience in this same place. This is Ghirardelli Square on Beach Street in San Francisco. And it was a crowded day, daytime. He's stepped away from his booth and is watching it to make sure no one is going to approach it or wants to buy his wares. And he sees two people who are approaching his booth. And the first thing he notices, they're unusually dressed in long, sort of khaki or tan trench coats.
Right.
Which is unusual because it's a bright, sunny, warm day. And then it becomes even stranger because he can start hearing them talking in his mind. Because he's like 40, 50 feet away and shouldn't be able to hear them. And this disoriented him at first. He thought he was hearing them. But for a few seconds there, he realized they were talking in his mind, or he could hear them in his mind.
Yep.
And one was a man wearing a hat, 6 foot tall, pretty much normal looking for the most part, and an attractive female, 5.5 feet, dark hair. And she says, I want to check out these rings. And he's like, okay, but just for a moment. The other gentleman, her companion. And this is when the witness sort of noticed and thought to himself, I hope you want to try on one of my rings. And she turns around because she apparently hears him thinking. And this is where it gets just from strange to bizarre.
Right.
She turns around and pulls her hands out of her pockets and says, "This is why I can't try on one of your rings." Mentally gives him this message telepathically. Pulls her hands out, and her hands, this is so strange. I haven't heard anything like this. I since have talked to other contactees who are like, yep, I encountered these beings. But she pulls out her hands, and her hands are not normal. He said they looked more like crow's feet than anything else, but very thin, very dark, kind of black, scaly, almost bone-like, clawed hands with extremely thin fingers. And she held them up, kind of hid them from view from everyone else, wiggled her fingers, said, "This is why I can't try on your rings."
Wow.
And he was absolutely astounded and kept his eye on her. And they started to walk away and kind of approached him, not directly, but walked right by him, 10 feet away. And she looked right at him, stared him face to face. And he said, and he's not completely sure of this, but because he was so shocked, but her eyes were not normal. He said they were completely black, dark. So here we have multiple unusual aspects to this. They're dressed strangely, they're behaving strangely, they look strange. And this is the sort of thing I've heard from other people who have seen ETs in public places. But yeah, just a very bizarre case.
Yeah. Well, what I love about the cases on the book, Preston, are the variety of witnesses. We get them from all walks of life, from different professions. So I guess aliens don't judge.
That's absolutely true. Because people have told me, oh, why is it only white people see UFOs? I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
No, no. In every book I've written on people's contacts, there's people of color in
Hmm.
there, all different races, men, women, young children, people all over the world. It's not blood type, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
It's not. There is no discernible pattern in terms of race, religion, political affiliation. Again, the only thing I found is a pattern which is sort of loose. It's a loose pattern, but people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity.
Hmm.
We do have a lot of artists, musicians,
Yep.
uh, this sort of thing.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Um, Before we close off, how did the experiences change these witnesses over the years? I mean, did any of them kind of say that, since they had their experience or experiences that they were a different person?
yeah, yeah, that's generally what happens. People will describe being spiritually transformed. So they become profoundly psychic. Yeah, there was one lady who had a simple sighting. Well, I guess it wasn't simple because her psychic abilities just went off the charts. In fact, that's what
Hmm.
she does for a living now. This is, I think, is a main ET agenda, is to wake us up to our own, I mean, I'll call them superhuman abilities, but they're really not. These are natural human abilities:
Yeah.
precognition,
Yep.
healing, out of body experiences. Uh, I mean, you name it: past life recall, channeling, psychic reading. This is one of the main things people will tell me. They become spiritually enlightened, sometimes
Yeah.
to a huge degree, but even a little bit. But that's absolutely a rule.
Yeah. Yeah. Preston, before we close it off, you've talked about the UAP report to Congress earlier, which left many of us pretty empty, but most of us expected something like that anyway. But I was hoping at least we'd get some congressional hearings out of that report, but nothing doing at this stage. But I mean, what were your thoughts on the whole episode? I mean, is it just something to keep us happy for the meantime, and maybe I'll come back with something a little bit more later on?
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. I'm a bit of two minds about it. I mean, it's great to see movement of any kind. And it is a tiny step forward for humankind
Hmm.
because they did leave the door open for, this being an actual phenomena. And they've always said, oh, this is not a threat, not a threat. And now they're marching this sort of alien threat narrative forward, which is absurd. These guys, these ETs have been around us for millennia. They're not here to
Yeah.
take over. There's
Yeah.
no good evidence of that. We're not going to get full disclosure from the government ever. It's clear to me now. This is still tightly controlled. I think these are tidbits just to sort of appease people. But they're talking about sightings when they know, for them to say, oh, this could be airborne clutter or a foreign government or our own government. I'm like, wait, aren't you our own government? And you're saying,
Hmm.
wouldn't you know if it's you? I mean, that makes no sense at all. The
Yeah.
whole report is just layered with lies. It really is. It's very disappointing. I don't think it's a good idea to look to them for truth on this subject. They've never been truthful or forthcoming or transparent on this subject in particular. Why would they be now?
Yeah.
Disclosure is not going to come from government. It's going to come from the people, experiencers, UFO researchers, and particularly the ETs,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I think is what's actually driving disclosure forward. Disclosure will happen.
Hmm.
At some point, you can't hide the truth. This
No.
is a big, big phenomena that's widespread. It's not going to be able to be hidden. And we're going to have full disclosure at some point. I think the government will be kicking and screaming the whole way. But at some point, the ETs will, I think, disclose their presence to humanity in a way that's unequivocally conclusive.
Hmm.
We will all know.
Yeah. Yeah. Preston, so the book is available from all good book outlets, including Amazon.
That's right. Yep. Amazon, other online retailers, hopefully at bookstores near you. If you can find one, bookstores are disappearing fast. But yeah, I've also got a website.
Hmm.
I'm I'm on Facebook,
Yep.
Twitter.
Yep.
I've got a new YouTube channel where I'm putting out my research. I think this is an important subject. I really do.
Yeah.
I think it has the capacity to change the world.
So it certainly does. And this book, this is, I mean, you've written I mean, I've lost count how many books you have out there now on the topic of UFOs, aliens, and all things paranormal.
Yeah, I've almost lost count myself. Not really. But yeah, I'm approaching 30 now, so
Wow. Wow.
it's pretty exciting.
Are you
Working on
working?
others.
Yeah. Are you working on another one? What's the next one about?
Oh yeah, I'm working on a couple actually. I want
Yep.
to put out another in my series, the Not From Here series,
Mm-hmm.
about the sort of outlying, unusual types of cases.
Yep.
But this next book I'm working on right now is something I'm really excited about because many of my books have been collections, sort of
Right. Right.
different people's accounts, and this one's just one person's uh, story. A lady who is having full-on conscious contact, a lady from
Mm-hmm.
Florida, who from age 14 onward is what we would call a conscious abductee. She
Yep.
doesn't like that term abductee. It's very friendly for her.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, her experiences are off the charts. She's proved it to me over and over again in numerous ways. So yeah, her case is one I think that's going to actually shock a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people who've had these experiences and never heard any cases as extensive as hers.
Yeah. Wow. Look forward to it. Preston, thanks once again for your time, and I'm sure we'll be talking again pretty soon in the not too distant future.
I sure hope so. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It's always fun.
Preston Dennett joining us today.